Is the COMEX about to default in the silver market? Well, that's the question we're going to look at today. My name is Rick Bloodworth. This is the Common Sense Christian Financial Channel. It is Saturday, February the 21st of 2026. Before we get into that, I did want to talk about where the market has been in the last week or two, and then we'll go ahead and talk about the COMEX and some different elements about the COMEX, probably most of which you're aware of, but some of it may be new to you. So let's go ahead and look at the prices. Yesterday was a very good day from a price perspective. Silver opened at $78.42. It went down to $77.39 and it closed near the high of the day at $84.52. So it was up $6 for the day and some change, about 8% for the day. The best price movement upward that we've seen in a couple of weeks. So rather encouraging if you're long on the silver market right now. I did want to point out that we have been trading in a range now for a little over 2 weeks. On Thursday, February the 5th, we had a sell-off in the market. Started off at about $89. It went up as high as $90.51, and then it just crashed to $70.86. And then the next day when it opened, it went all the way down to $63.98. But when that occurred on the Shanghai market, the officials there noticed that there was some unusual goings on with one of the traders. He was trading apparently, or this entity was trading under several different accounts. And so when they shut that person down, or that entity down, the silver market went back up, and it went back up in a pretty good fashion. As a matter of fact, on that day, there was about a $15 range, and it settled very close to the high for the day. So other than this day right here, where we had some obvious manipulation that was illegal and that was caught and put a stop to, we've been trading in this range now for 2 weeks and a couple of days. And so if you just kind of notice where this closed on the 6th, you can just draw a straight line and you can see that it has touched that point every trading day since then. And so we're in a fairly tight range right now. It's a big range historically, don't get me wrong, but from a recent perspective, it's a fairly small range. And again, we haven't had just an awful lot of movement. We've tested the bottom a couple of times and it's bounced right back up off of that. And then yesterday we actually closed at the highest price we've closed at in the past 2 weeks, and so it's looking fairly favorable as far as that goes. But that's the market right now. And now I wanted to talk about the COMEX and the NYMEX. Those two are related, but the COMEX is the one that trades the silver contracts, and so that's the one we're interested in. And I thought I would just kind of bring some very basic information to you on that that'll maybe help you to not only understand the market a little bit better, but to be able to understand what people are talking about when they throw out all these numbers that they have, and especially when they're insinuating that these numbers mean an imminent collapse of the COMEX. And so, first of all, just from a very basic standpoint, one contract on the COMEX, a regular futures contract, is 5,000 ounces. And so 2,000 contracts will make 1,000,000 ounces. But the volume on the COMEX is the amount of contracts that have traded that day. And so when we talk about volume, just in the last week, we've had a volume along these lines. On Monday, the market was only open for a little bit, so they combined the volume between Monday and Tuesday. It had a volume of 109,000 contracts. And then Wednesday, 71,000 contracts, Thursday, 60,000 contracts, and Friday, about 89,000 contracts. And so that sounds like an awful lot, especially just take the yesterday, 89,000, but that's a relatively low number in recent months. In January the 26th, there was 360,000 contracts representing 1.8 billion ounces of silver. The annual mining supply for the world is about half of that. So you can see how wild the market was back then. On the 30th of January, Black Friday, when the market had a $45 range and settled $30 below its opening, we had a 368 contracts traded that day, or about 1.84 billion ounces of silver. And so when you compare these 1.8 and 1.84 to the 500 million ounces that we're doing in this past week, you can see that we have settled down a little bit on that. And so again, the volume on each trading day is just the number of contracts that have exchanged. Since we're talking about a futures market, and since March is of such interest to people right now, I thought we would talk about that for just a brief moment. March, with its delivery coming up in just a week, or its first notice day, and the first notice day is just when those who are long can start giving an intent to take delivery notice to the ones who have sold that silver. And so that day is going to be fairly important as we come up, and it will probably indicate, especially starting next Friday, it will very likely indicate whether we're going to have any problems in this next delivery. But the contracts, main contracts are traded in March, May, September, and December. And there are other months that trades those months as well, but usually not much activity. Well, one of the things that's made people nervous this year is this January there were nearly 50 million ounces of silver that took delivery in January. And so that's an incredibly high amount for a January, for a non-delivery month. And because of that, a lot of people are concerned that this delivery month coming up in March may actually drain the COMEX. The COMEX holds its silver in two categories. One is called registered. The registered category are those contracts that actually have silver available for exchange. In other words, the people who own that silver have registered it with the COMEX, and they're saying they're willing to sell it. There's also an eligible category, and in that eligible category, you have all sorts of silver that may or may not ever be intended for delivery. That's held in a dozen different depositories around the country. Some of them you'll recognize, Brinks and Loomis and JP Morgan Chase and other ones like that. But again, the eligible is just the amount of silver that is held in these vaults, these 12 different vaults, that is in the form of 1,000-ounce delivery good bars. But just because they're held there doesn't mean that there's any intent to go ahead and sell them. And so it's much more accurate to look at the registered category as far as what's available today in order to be able to maybe take some guesses on what might happen tomorrow. And so maybe the next point that we want to make is open interest. And people talk about open interest a lot, but I'm not sure everybody understands what that is. And so just on the most basic perspective, open interest is this. Let's say 10 contracts of jelly beans traded today on the COMEX. And 8 of those contracts were just ones that were buying back what they'd already sold or selling what they had already purchased, or it was they're buying March jelly beans and they're selling May jelly beans. And so the open interest from those 10 contracts, since 8 of them were wash sales, is just 2. And right now we have an open interest on the March contract of 44,542 contracts, or 221 million ounces of silver. And right now in the registered category, that which is available for delivery and has committed to that delivery, is only 88.19 million ounces. And so you can see there's quite a difference between the 221 million and the 88 million ounces. And so a lot of people are thinking, well, if they just take delivery on half of that, then that's going to overwhelm the COMEX and force a default. Here's one of the most important things to know about the COMEX exchange. They cannot technically default because they are a cash settlement exchange. And by that I mean if the contracts that have been purchased cannot be delivered, then the COMEX will just set a price. Whatever price seems the most reasonable to them. Obviously, they're going to have to go close to spot, but they're the ones that get to set the price, and they can determine what that cash settlement is going to be. And so the COMEX cannot default because they can settle in cash. The obvious problem with that is if they ever had to settle in cash, well, that could create a disturbance within the market that would reduce their credibility even more than perhaps you might think it's already reduced. And so we've got 221 million ounces that are open right now that people could take delivery on, and we've got 88.19 million ounces that are registered. That difference will have to be somehow resolved in the next 5 weeks, because the last delivery day for March is March the 30th, and so we've got 5 weeks left before that contract runs out. Now, as far as maybe giving some semblance of comfort on that, the market just 3 weeks ago, the open interest for the March contract was somewhere along the lines of 85,000 contracts, or about 422 million ounces of silver. And so that has dropped by 200 million ounces of silver in just 3 weeks. We've got 5 more weeks left in this period. Now, I would say this is the low-hanging fruit as far as this. These were the contracts that were the easiest to unwind. Whenever there is something of a squeeze in the market, where there are more people wanting to buy than sell, or more people wanting to sell than buy, well, that can create some pretty big price fluctuations. And so that certainly could be something that happens in the next 5 weeks. Keep your eye on that and just be aware that it could happen. And then finally, I did want to point this out. The May contract, which is the next delivery month, just surpassed the March contract month. As far as right now, March has 44,542 open contracts, and May has 56,000 open contracts. So May is starting to set up to be a pretty good month. But again, this is not that atypical at all. Very often the ones that trade in COMEX futures will just keep rolling it over until they're ready to purchase, or they're rolling it over for other reasons. And again, the COMEX very much is a hedging tool that the miners will use, that those who are buying it will use. If you are in the business of making solar panels and you have to have a certain amount of silver in order to manufacture those, then you might go ahead and lock in a price right now by purchasing a futures contract. And then if the market goes down, you don't have to take delivery of that, but you take the entire loss until you get out of that position. And the same thing for the miners. Once they have committed themselves to selling that silver, unless they buy it back, then they're just going to have to take whatever loss is there in the difference between what they sold it for and what they have to buy it back for. Or they just go ahead, and this is the most common case, they just go ahead and they make the delivery on that. And again, the miners have a much different motivation than speculators do, because they are actually producing the silver when they see a favorable price. And don't you know that when silver was up at $121 an ounce 3 weeks ago, that was favorable. And I imagine a lot of miners sold forward into that market in order to be able to take advantage of that price appreciation. And so this is what the COMEX does primarily, is they're a hedging tool. Very often, as a matter of fact, probably 9 times out of 10, those contracts are never delivered on. They're just something that will be a placeholder for the price. And so hopefully that will help you to understand where we're at. And then just to kind of wrap it all up, we have 5 days left right now. Next Friday will be the first notice day for the March contract. And by that, those who are holding the contracts, who are long, who've purchased those contracts, they're going to either declare their intent to take delivery, or they're going to sell them, or they're going to go ahead and just ride it out until closer to March the 30th. And so this first notice day is rather important. If there's a lot of people lining up to take delivery, and especially if it approaches anywhere near this 88 million ounces that are in the registered category, well, that could push the price up considerably. On the other hand, if it turns out to be a non-event and the people have already taken delivery who are intending to, and they start getting out of their positions, and there's much more registered silver than there is claims on that registered silver, well, you can probably expect to see the price go down. Now, I do think that when we talk about the ranges that we looked at earlier, there does seem to be some stability starting to form. So keep an eye on that range. That'll help you determine whether or not we're starting to break down or whether we're starting to break out. And so keep that in mind. But also, again, just keep an eye on this contract coming up on Friday. Next week will show you, I think, a lot. If the market just continues to go up next week, that may mean that people think there's going to be a heavy delivery month. And so if that's the case, you might see the market go up. And don't discount this either. We all witnessed, most of us in this space witnessed what happened in December and January, where the price went up from the $60 an ounce to $120 an ounce, and then it was dumped in one day. There is something called pump and dump in just about every futures market. And every once in a while, when people who are used to taking advantage of some things see that opportunity, that's exactly what they'll do, is they will pump the price up by buying contracts, and then they will start selling contracts. And believe me, those who have that kind of money are very much aware of what the stops are on the way down. And so you can be pretty sure that on January the 30th, when the bank started selling these contracts, or whoever it was started selling these contracts, they knew where the stops were. And every time somebody had hit a stop or a margin call, well, that just kept the price going down further and further. That was the dump part. And then the ones who have sold short into that are able to buy it back, hopefully close to the low for them, in order to make a profit, and then they can just do it again. So is that what's about to happen next week and the weeks after that? Well, we don't know. Nobody knows for sure. But just be aware that this is indeed a time in the market that can change pretty quickly. The volatility has gone down a lot. The number of contracts being traded each day has gone down a lot. And that has a tendency to kind of lull some people to sleep. And that's usually when people strike, is when the other ones are asleep, and that's when they make their move. So be attentive to that as well. But is the March contract going to cause the COMEX to default? And of course, the answer to that is no, they can't default. The more accurate question is, can it force them into a cash settlement? It doesn't appear that that's going to happen, but it could. And we need to be aware of that, because if it does force them into a cash settlement, weird things can happen. Back in 1980, when the Hunt brothers were cornering the market and the price pushed all the way up to $50 an ounce, the COMEX changed the rules. First, by raising the margin requirements, and that's sensible to raise the margin requirements. Once, if you're trading $5,000 worth of something and now all of a sudden it's worth $50,000, the margin requirement should go up. But I do want to point out that the margin is about double now what it was back when silver was about $30 or $40 higher than it is right now. So they have raised the margins. That's one of the ways the COMEX can control the number of contracts that are being bought and sold. And then the other thing is they can change the rules. In 1980, they came up with something called Rule 7. And Rule 7 prevented anybody from purchasing new contracts. The only thing you could do is sell out of your position or take delivery. And when that happened, the market in 1980 went down about 80% in just a couple of days. I don't look for that to happen right now, because in 1980 the market was much different. There was a surplus, a glut of silver on the market that was temporarily interrupted by the Hunt brothers trying to corner the market in that particular area. But once they changed the rules on them, and with the glut of silver that was available for purchase, it drove the price down. I don't think we have a glut of silver anymore. As a matter of fact, we have had a deficit for the last 5 years between what is mined in the world, what's recycled in the world, and what is purchased for use in the world. With that being the case, it would be very difficult to do a Rule 7 type of a trick on that. And so I don't really look for them to do that, but I do look for them to try and do something if the day approaches and it looks like they might be risking a cash settlement. I believe that they will do everything in their power to prevent that. But again, I don't look for that. I certainly don't hope for that. A lot of people are hoping that the COMEX is brought down. But remember, those of us who buy on the retail side, our prices are set by the COMEX, by the futures market, and by the spot market in particular. And so if that gets out of whack, or if that pricing mechanism is destroyed, there could be a lot of interruptions in this market, and it could cost you dearly. So I don't think I would be hoping for a cash settlement type of a default. I would just be hoping that everything just kind of gets back to normal and the normal supply-demand features take over. But if something happens to the pricing mechanism, well, it could fluctuate and fluctuate in a hurry against you and in a different direction than you were expecting. So just keep that in mind. Well, that's the video for today. Let me know what you think about it. I certainly appreciate your watching today. Let me know what you think about it in the comments. I enjoy those. And for those of you who have subscribed, I particularly want to express my appreciation for your having done so. But thanks for watching today. I hope we'll see you again next time. God bless.